telling you to work on your recovery. Everybody's telling you to sleep better and to eat better because it's on the recovery that you get stronger. And everybody's telling you that you should improve the quality of your sleep, and you're like, yeah, of course I want that. Uh, and also, then there's this guy telling you that soreness is not that good, or maybe it is, but in your head you're like, but if I work out really hard, which is the way that I need to do things in order to get fit, I get really sore. And so, like, how is that gonna work? How is recovery helping soreness, or is preventing it, or what's the deal there? It's a nap, part of recovery. Anyhow, uh, what the fuck is recovery is the question. So that's the purpose of this presentation today. Uh, what the fuck is recovery? And actually, there's a subtitle there that I didn't put, that is how to do it. And so that's what we want. And so let's dive into it. The problem with recovery is that when you get into the world of recovery, you're automatically in this world, in the world of sci-fi marketing, because recovery uh, has two main aspects. First, there's a lot of confusion surrounding recovery, like as we said there, like what does it really mean? And the second, there's a big promise, that is like, if your recovery game is better, you have your fitness score. So if your recovery game is better, then even fitter, right? And so the confusion plus the promise creates a fertile ground for sci-fi marketing. That's why I have chosen this image behind you, which is how sci-fi marketing works. It just throws you things that look like science together, and that create the sense in the consumer that this must be backed up by science, and it must work, and it must be very high tech, right? And so unfortunately, this is where the world of recovery is, right here in this image, right in that image. And so my purpose today is to talk to you about recovery, and what I'm gonna try to do is clarify some of the concepts. And by clarify, I mean, I'm not gonna paint you a picture in which is this is recovery. I'm actually gonna paint you a picture of, like, we don't know much, and this is what we know, and this is what, like, based on what we know, this is how I think we should operate. After that, I'm gonna present you some of them, like, protocols. I'm not gonna give you a lot of technicalities there, but I'm gonna just give you all the other options, and then I'm gonna present you with my idea of what to do in this case and how to do recovery. So let's dive into the thing. So the first thing is, let's analyze the main concepts surrounding recovery, and the main ideas and beliefs, because there's a lot of things that people believe, but that are just beliefs. The first one is that the muscle damage hypertrophy idea. So if you ask the regular trainer at your gym, like, hey, how does exercise work? The most common answer will be, like, I cannot say it exactly, but I will put my money on the most common answer will be like, hey, you create some micro damage at the tissue level in the muscle, and then when the muscle recovers, like, because it heals, because we're healing machines, it recovers stronger and bigger, and that creates hypertrophy, right? Like, so that's a very common belief, and I say it's belief because the evidence that we have doesn't fully support that. So the first thing that we know is that yes, exercise can induce muscle damage. We can measure, like, we can have people exercise and then measure their bloods and have biomarkers of damage. That can happen, but it's not necessary, nor is sufficient. And what do I mean by that? I'm gonna give you two examples. The first one is occlusion training, which is when you tie something to your limbs to block blood flow, which increases blood flow, right? And then you do exercise naturally that muscle that you have occluded at light weights, at very light weights, 50% of your 1 rep max. And what they have been seeing, researchers here, is that this protocol creates adaptation, but you don't see the markers for muscle damage. And so that tells you, like, hey, you can create hypertrophy without muscle damage. So that means that muscle damage is not necessary. But it's also not sufficient, because we know by analyzing our runners that running creates a lot of muscle damage and not hypertrophy or bigger muscles or adaptation in those particular muscles, right? Not this kind of adaptation. And so you can create damage and not create hypertrophy. You can create hypertrophy and not create muscle damage. What we know is that exercise does drive the hypertrophy, which is cool because we want to keep exercising. But the muscle damage hypertrophy theory is just that, it's a belief. Now, that the fact that it is a belief doesn't mean that it cannot happen in certain cases. Like we could perfectly see that if there is damage in some cases, that damage creates some adaptation, but we cannot generalize, and not in a big way, right? And so that is the first belief surrounding recovery, because most people will, because of this belief of like damaging the muscle, they, for example, think that that's what you should be looking for so that the muscle heals, right? Like, so identifying these beliefs and knowing if they're truth or not is important because they determine your behaviors, right? The second concept surrounding recovery that is very important, and again, and just like the first one, it is in the scientific literature, it is in the books. It's just because it's a belief doesn't mean that it's invented or like it's not there. It's the stress adaptation model. This is the model that more commonly we use to explain how exercise works. So if you ask a person, a more educated person, like, how does exercise work? They'll tell you like, okay, well, exercise is a stressor that creates a stress response, and the stress response is a highly orchestrated response from your body that creates an adaptation to that stressor. Just like, for example, if you put a person into some kind of stress, for example, into living in a closed room with a bat, you do that enough times, and that person creates some kind of adaptation to be able to live with bats. I don't know, that's a bad example, but there is this model of stress adaptation that comes from psychiatry, which is something that physiology has taken, and is the way we most commonly explain exercise and its benefits. Now you could say, like, isn't this just another version of the muscle damage hypertrophy? No, not necessarily, because the stress adaptation doesn't mean that the muscle is being damaged. The stress is not just another way to say muscle damage. This stress is a stimulus that creates a very particular physiological response that is not exclusive just to exercise, and that you can measure by biomarkers. And so it's a little bit different. It has commonalities, but one of the differences is that the adaptation process is not a healing process, right? And so under this model, recovery, which will be techniques aid that are targeted to aid this adaptation, would be different than techniques targeted to aid healing, right? And so similar for sure, recovery is there somewhere, but not the same. Now, it is a model, which means that it explains a lot of the things that we see, but it doesn't explain lots of things, right? And so it's just a way of see things. Good. And the last, and this is one of the concepts that is around recovery, and that is one of the concepts that makes the idea of recovery important. Just because we believe like this is how we explain exercise, okay, that makes sense to believe like, okay, there's such a thing as recovery, and like how do we help adaptation, right? And how does the body adapt is what we could call the process of recovery, right? And so that is what is related. And then the third concept that is around here is the concept of muscle soreness, which is that also known as delayed onset muscle soreness. Is that muscle soreness that hurts so good that when you start working out, that you like, is that secondary soreness that some people believe that it is necessary, that if you don't have muscle soreness, you didn't hit the muscle hard enough, right? And so this is a common consequence of exercise that people relate to the muscle damage idea, right? And so if you believe the muscle damage idea, soreness is easily explained. It's like, yeah, I just damaged my muscle and now it's gonna grow bigger. And so naturally your belief is going to be that like, oh, I should get sore a lot, right? And that idea it's wrong. So we know that just like muscle damage is not necessary, We know that muscle soreness is not necessary or sufficient to create adaptation, so you can have no soreness whatsoever and create a lot of adaptation, and you can have a lot of soreness and no adaptation. Quite the opposite, you can have lots of soreness and a lot of injuries. Not only that, the relationship between soreness and muscle damage is not direct, is not univocal there. So you can have soreness and no signs of muscle damage, and you can have soreness and signs of muscle damage, and they're not one to one. Soreness is something that we cannot explain very well, that we don't understand very well, and that is very subjective, meaning that like it's something that you feel, but it's something that we cannot track very well with markers, right? And so these are the main concepts surrounding concepts and beliefs surrounding the idea of recovery, and that's what makes complicated. And all these ideas have developed. I think they're best exemplified in the concept of anti-fragility developed by Nicholas Taleb, or Nassim Nicholas Taleb, which is the concept of like creating this idea of anti-fragility as like those organisms or events or things in general, for lack of a better word, that gain from stressors, that like if you give enough stressors they become stronger, and by stressors Taleb really means something, like something negative, like so if you take a glass of wine, like you have it there and you hit it hard enough, that seed is not gonna recover. With the human body, if you hit the human body hard enough, but not too hard, just repeatedly, but not too hard, it will always keep recovering more and more and more. And as you can see, that this idea is related to the concept of recovery. It comes from these ideas, but those are just ideas, really. As I told you, and I gave you examples, there's no univocal relationship there, and it's how we can explain exercise, but it's not necessarily, like it's not a bulletproof concept there. And so what we do know, and this is what we're always looking for, is like, even though we cannot explain how things happen, even though our theories are just that, and like they don't explain a lot of things, there are measurable consequences of exercise that are not necessary. So this doesn't happen every time that you do exercise, but they do happen. And so I just have to like state them because we know them. Stiffness, meaning shortened range of motion than normal, it happens, it's a consequence. Soreness, again, the sensation of pain, usually 24 to 72 hours after working out. And again, it's just a perceived sensation of pain, but that doesn't mean there's damage. Inflammation, very measurable, right? There's lots of markers of inflammation after exercise. It doesn't happen always, but it happens. The pump, it's an inflammation response. Creatine kinase, compound molecule that is part of the synthesis of protein, and we see increased levels of it in the blood after exercise. And then we have markers for connective tissue damage that I'm not gonna get into it, but we also see them and we can measure. And these are the consequences that we can associate causally by exercise, but we cannot say exactly why they happen. We just know that exercise creates this. It doesn't always create them all. It creates some more time than others, and so on. And this is really what we know, right? Like this is really what we know. And if you're thinking about recovery, probably recovery could be, how do we deal with these ones that are the consequences that of exercise that like somehow we don't want that much, right? Like we don't want stiffness, soreness, inflammation, or increased levels of creatine kinase or connective tissue damage, right? Like that could be one way to look at the recovery. And I'll leave it there. I'll give you another one in a second. But okay, so we have all those theories, are good theories. We'll keep them in mind. Some of them, like the muscle damage theory is not very inclusive, and so it's not very important. The stress adaptation is a good one. And we have these very real things here. Good. Before I move forward, let me tell you this. The first thing is, just because we don't fully understand how the body recovers from exercise, it does not mean it doesn't. So just because I'm saying like these are just theories, it doesn't mean like, okay, Juan, so what's the deal with recovery? No, we know that there's an adaptation. We know that there are these negative consequences, or these consequences of exercise, and we know by anecdotal evidence that there's techniques that can aid the process of recovering from exercise. There's such a thing, even though we cannot explain it, right? And so we can define the process of recovery as the process in which the body changes because of the stimulus of exercise, right? That would be a simple explanation, a simple definition. What it does mean, and this is what matters to you really, is that if somebody's selling you something or telling you something, a scientific explanation of why a recovery technique works, they're mostly lying, or you should be very careful. Why? Because we don't fully understand that process. And so if somebody's trying to sell you something based on some scientific claims, other than this is something that we have tried with a lot of people, and these people report that they're feeling better, and like if the explanation is like we tested and it works, versus the explanation is like because the things that happen inside your muscle, right? So false sci-fi science versus practical, you can grab it science. You have to be careful, right? And the second disclaimer that I have to do is like I'm not talking about injuries here. Like injuries is another thing, and we're not talking about the healing process. We're talking about the period and the processes that your metabolism goes through after exercise, and how it adapts from those processes. So make that disclaimer. There is the, I'm gonna leave it there, the theory, but I want to leave you with this. Even though it's not, we don't have all the data to explain everything, and we cannot explain much, we have to accept Sales theory, which is the theory of the stress adaptation response, because it's the one that explains better what we see. And if you think it for a second, we do see a stress response after exercise, and we do see an adaptation. How those things happen, we don't know, but we do see those two. So this model works, right? And so we have to use it. When you heard this first in this video, I can guarantee you 30 years from now, we'll have a way better model to understand all these things with a lot more data. But right now, this is what we have. This is what we'll use, right? It's the paradigm that better explains what we see, and so we'll take it. So for the rest of the talk, I'm thinking about exercise as a stressor that produces an adaptation response, and what we're gonna be thinking on terms of recovery and recovery techniques, which again is what matters to you, is how can I create that adaptation? How can I create a better adaptation? How can I aid that adaptation, right? Which is what guides you. And remember, we're not talking about healing nor damage, because we know that those actually are not necessary. And so take out, those are the things that we are eliminating from recovery and that are very important for you, because that's gonna drive your behavior. You shouldn't be looking for damage when you're working out, and if you have to heal, there's something wrong, right? And so this is different. This is a different idea, and remember that ideas drive behavior, and so that's why this matters to you. Good. Now, with that said, now that we have some clarification there, let's move to all the protocols that are available to you, and I'm gonna go through them so that maybe you can see which ones work for you, right? Because again, the fact that it's not very clear for us how it works doesn't mean that it doesn't, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. So the first thing is, what's the aim of all these protocols that we see in the market? So the most important one is to increase your blood flow, which relies on the idea that more blood flow, the faster your blood is moving through your system, the more you're gonna aid the system in bringing the nutrients that it needs to do its adaptation process, and it's gonna help clean what is usually called the waste. Whatever byproducts of metabolic reactions are happening. Just because we don't know how adaptation happens, we can that sounds like a super cool idea to me. Yeah, awesome. We're letting the blood bring all the nutrients and taking the garbage out. What we don't know. And so that's all this. What you're gonna see is that all this makes sense, but We don't know. Anyhow, but that's some of the techniques that we're gonna have rely on this idea. Second is restore biochemical balance. So think that like after working out, you sweat so much, and your biochemical balance is your biochemical balance is off. And so, for example, you have lost a lot of salts, and so you're gonna have to like organize that again. And so you drink electrolytes or something like that. That's a typical case of restoring biochemical balance. Then you have interventions that look for muscle desensitization, elongation, relaxation, and suppleness, and are all these techniques that are trying to deal with stiffness, right? And so that's their aim, try to fix stiffness. One good question is like, is stiffness, does it need to be aid? And does this actually aids that? Open question. And then we have the techniques that like try to change the state of your mind and create relaxation, right? And so the theory there, and I feel like this is the one that like has the most good evidence backing, is that your body, and I'm sorry about that typo, if your body is in a relaxed state, its autonomic tone is down, which means that you're in a rest and digest mode, which is when your body heals and creates all the metabolic processes that help with rebuilding tissues and so on. And so putting adaptation in that close to healing makes sense to me. But again, all these are open. They all make sense. They all make perfect sense. They're all back with some, like they're not something that somebody took out of their butt. These make sense. When I say that they're not very fully proved, is because we don't know very well how the whole thing works, and so we just have partial ideas there. Let's go through the protocols. So the protocols that go with blood flow are saunas, hot baths, and infrared lamps. Increasing heat is gonna increase blood flow, so that's the idea behind those, and that's why how they work. I think if a sauna is a great thing, so if you feel like it helps you, that's awesome. Then we have wash or scraping theory, which is what you see there on the picture, and so it's a Chinese technique that if you scrape hard enough, it's gonna promote blood flow on the superficial fascias of your skin and muscles, as you can see by the redness of the person that is being scraped there. Then we have the active recovery protocol, so that all those people that are telling you like you should go into a walk tomorrow or like run. The theory behind it is that if you know, like you're a runner, you run a marathon on Sunday or Monday, if you run a little bit, you're gonna be using the same muscle that you use for that marathon, and that's gonna mean that you're gonna increase the blood flow in those muscles, right? Same thing. Stretching is a very common in terms of the fitness itself is and you know, thinking about stretching, thinking about recovery techniques, stretching is one of the older ones, and it has always been explained as increasing blood flow, also dealing with stiffness, but it's mostly increasing with blood flow, the explanation that is being given why those aid with recovery. Then we have electrical muscle stimulation, is those pads that you attach, and that by creating electrical shocks the muscle contracts, and because you don't have, it's not your neuron activating the muscle, but the muscle is being activated externally, is believed with good reason, that makes total sense again, that is mild, it's a mild effort on the body, and is because there's contraction of the muscle, is generating blood flow. And then we have compression socks and boots. Compression socks go from like regular socks to boots, which are like those big things full of air that like really compress your muscle, and we know that compression increases pressure, and pressure increases speed, and so the more pressure, the more speed is going to be in your blood flow, and so on. And so these are the techniques there that increase blood flow. Then we have the techniques that change the muscle tone, and so you start with self-myofascial. Well, they're all based on massage therapy, and by muscle tone is think about muscle tone as like the level of stiffness, how tense is your muscle, right? And so it's just like Is it acute? Is it like low? That's how it is. So the first technique is self-myofascial release, rolling on a foam roller or a lacrosse ball, something of the sort. So you're dealing with the fascia, which is the connective tissue that is on top of the muscle, not the muscle themselves, and like you are making the fibers of the muscle and the fascial they're attached and you're detaching them. Then you have percussion therapy, which is when you take off your t-shirt and you go into like I don't know where this dude is, and you throw a lot of powder on top of your drums and hit it really hard. No, not really, I'm just making fun of stock images. Percussion therapy is when you get one of those guns that hits the muscle really hard. That is percussion therapy. It's a therapy that is supposed to decrease muscle tone. And what the people that sells this says is that it really helps with DOMS. I have seen the research there. It really helps with DOMS, which is not necessarily a good or a bad thing. Then we have massage therapy. So any type of massage will go here. And massage therapy is way older than exercise, or like the exercise as we do it. And the idea is it goes from the relief of knots or points of pressure, which are really spasms of the muscle, to again the same thing as self-myofascial release. And then we have stretching, which also is supposed to aid with muscle tone. All these categories are not exclusive. I'm just like nesting them in the most sensible way. Good. Then we have all the techniques that deal with inflammation. We have ice and cold baths. We have like when you get your bathtub full of ice and you just throw yourself there. You have cryotherapy, which is ice bath to 2.0. So you create a chamber and you put yourself there at like Arctic temperatures. We have band flossing, when you take a plastic band, an elastic band, and go around your limbs and create a lot of tension and compression, but in a particular direction, the direction of your heart. So because you're creating a particular, prioritizing a particular direction, that is how people explains that it helps with inflammation. And then we have ice patches. These are complicated. This is, I think, like these are the most complicated techniques because they are the ones that explain the least. And for some people, inflammation is like confusing the fire truck for the fire, right? Like, so inflammation is the mechanism that your body has of healing. And so for some people, it's like every time that you see damage, what you're seeing is fire trucks, and then you're like, we have to eliminate the fire trucks. You're like, no, dude, no. So that take into consideration. And the other thing is that cryotherapy and ice baths, ice and anything cold slows down anything, right? Cold things slows down processes. And so if the theory of adaptation is that it's a process done by the body, and you're probably gonna be slowing it down. So that's a complicated discussion there that happens around inflammation. But we also know that inflammation creates a little bit of numbness, so it helps with pain, and so complicated things there. Good. Then we have the relaxation techniques, which start by having some puppy time, which is when you grab these gorgeous puppies right here and you just hang out with them and you feel better about the world and yourself. Not really. It's not a common technique, but it should. We start with meditative practices. So anything in contemplative in nature that brings your autonomic tone down, and that's very measurable. We have good biomarkers for autonomic tone. Suspension therapy, which is an old therapy from earlier this century, in which you try to suspend yourself by a complicated system of pulleys to create to create an anti-gravitational kind of sensation in the body, so that the muscles kind of fully release just because they are completely supported. And then we have float tanks, which are like suspension therapy 2.0, which is when you get yourself on a chamber that is like a pool of salty water, and you just chill there. And actually, if you haven't done it, people goes crazy about it. I want to do it. I should do it actually. But anyhow, so float tanks, they aim for the same thing. You're so suspended that like you're floating and your muscles fully relax, and because you're close in a chamber in which you cannot feel your muscles and everything is dark, the time passes differently and so on, and so that is float tank. And then we have again puppy time. Good. And the last ones are the interventions that deal with biochemical balances, so nutritional interventions and hydration. So think about all those bars that they try to sell you with protein. They are trying to tell you that like, hey, this is gonna help you with recovery. Think about the pre, intra, and post workout smoothies. Think about electrolytes. Think about like salt tablets. Think about the people that tell you to eat gummy bears after lifting weights. All those things are meant to be helping with the biochemical balance of your body after exercise. So these are the main type of interventions, and I'll tell you right away with biochemical balance, I'll tell you one thing: nothing beats solid, standard, good nutrition. If your system is good, well fed continuously for long periods of time, talking months or years, your body will know how to find its balance on its own, and you don't have to aid externally. Good, but that is my only asterisk there with respect to all these techniques. But the question is, and we have arrived finally to the good question of this presentation, is like, okay, so we have theoretical kind of clarification there. We have all these techniques. How do I do this thing? How do I apply it? Knowing that like I cannot fully explain the whole thing, knowing that like, yeah, for some people they're good, and how should I do this? So I'm gonna give you a template to follow that is simple. So you should start, and we have good evidence to support everything that I'm saying. So there's two principles that you should first follow with any recovery technique. The first one is that for any recovery technique, it has to be intentional. You have, and this means two things. You need to be trying to recover. You need to be in a particular place of mind in which you're like, okay, this is gonna help me recover. It has to be intentional. And this implies that you have to believe in it. There's an excellent book on recovery called Good to Go. And the big conclusion is like, if you don't believe in it, it doesn't matter the technique. Which makes a lot of sense because this is an adaptation to a stressor. It makes a lot of sense if we explain it within the stressor model, but that's a model we're adapting, right? And we know about the guys that are studying stress that the way you think about the stressor matters, and so the way that you think about the recovery really matters. And so recovery should be intentional in the sense that like it should be a dedicated activity that you are doing for recovery. You should believe in it, and secondly, you should be measuring. So, and I'm sorry I did that voice, but that means that you wanna know if that intervention works, which implies two things. You have to give it enough time, enough of a trial time, and for physiological interventions, I think 3 months is the minimum. Ideally, it will be a year, and you have to have a metric to know if that intervention is working. So think about this. The best metric to know if your recovery is working is how ready do you feel for your workouts. If you're feeling ready continuously to your workouts, you're recovering good. Because if you are not recovering, then you're not feeling ready, right? I mean, if you're not feeling ready, it means that you're not recovering. Sorry, the logic implication goes in the other direction. If you're not feeling ready for your workouts, then you're not recovering enough, right? Or fast enough for what you want, right? And so readiness is gonna be the way you need to measure. That will be the optimum metric there. How to measure how ready you are? I have a whole video on this, and I am linking it right here. And so check that video because it's actually a quite easy thing to measure. But So recovery should be intentional. It means that like you believe in it, you're giving it a space of time and effort, and you're measuring, right? That is the first thing. And the second thing is that no matter what you do, in order for aiding in recovery, you're aiding the process of adaptation, and the process of adaptation requires to bring your autonomic tone down. We know that by the guys that work with stress, and so you should be looking for these two principles, no matter what you do. So with that template, how are you gonna do it? Very simple. Do you see all those techniques that I said there? Choose one that you think will work. If you have ever done a massage before, I will go with something similar to a massage. And like if that massage made you feel better. Why? Because there's already buy-in there. And if you feel better, no matter what, that is a good intervention that is gonna aid with recovery, because it's gonna bring your autonomic tone down. And if you just make it a little bit more intentional, boom, that's a good technique. So that will be one example. If you, for example, really believe in active recovery, you have done it before, you're like, yeah, every time that if I stop working out one day, I feel worse. Okay, active recovery, let's try that. Start with active recovery. Remember, intention is important there, so that is not gonna become a workout, that is an active recovery day. So you should make sure that your aim there is not to get fitter, but to recover better. That's gonna drive your practice. Good, so try that again for 6 months, measuring how ready are you for your workouts, so on, right? So start with something that you already have some buy-in. You feel like stretching is the way to go, yoga is the way to go, awesome. All those are awesome. Try one of them, but measure if it's aiding you with recovery, if it's gonna make you feel more ready for your workouts. And do this for 6 months with each one of you. You're like, but Juan, I'm gonna do 6 months, and am I gonna find out that it doesn't work? If you had to, like, if it's not working, you will know by the second month. So don't worry. But if it's working, by the end of the 6 months, you will know how much. And so this is not lost time, right? And again, if there's already buy-in there, you're already making good progress, right? And so that's why the system is gonna work. Good. That is it. And as you saw there, all the things that I'm saying there will help you avoiding also the salesperson, the sci-fi marketing, which is the most important part, and I think this is gonna help you the most. And so try any of these things, and if you need help with this, if you are really trying to make sure that your fitness and your nutrition and your mindset are all aligned, and you want us to come with our experience to help you out, well, book a call and we'll help you in my website. But if you're trying this and it works for you, please shoot me an email. I'll love to know. And that is it. Give it a try. Good recovery.